Welcome to another edition of Preaching Pointers. And in this video, I'd like to talk about practicing your sermon. So I'm thinking particularly about practicing the delivery of it prior to actually delivering it before your audience or congregation. So the work of studying the passage, the work of putting my notes together, my points together, has been done, but now I want to have a go at practicing that sermon before I actually go and deliver it to a congregation or audience. Now, we might all have different ways of preparing to deliver a sermon, deliver a message. I'm not saying that you have to do it this way. I'm just saying this is how I do it, and this is some of the benefits I personally find from doing it in this fashion. So what I would be looking to do once I've got my notes, I would be looking to find somewhere private where I can imagine I'm in front of the congregation, in front of the audience, and I will have a go at several goes at practicing delivering the sermon out loud, as though I was actually delivering it to a congregation or audience. And I find that there are several benefits from doing that. So these benefits would include, it helps me to remember the sermon content. So as I've been studying and I've been making my notes and I've been making my points that I want to make and putting them down in the order that I want to make them, then going ahead and having a go at practicing the sermon helps to get that sermon content into my mind, not just the content into my mind, but the order of the content into my mind, so that when I'm actually delivering the sermon, when I'm actually preaching the sermon, I don't have to think so much about the sermon content and the sermon structure, and I can focus more on engaging with the audience. So having those practice deliveries beforehand helps to get that sermon content and sermon structure embedded in my mind. Another thing I find helpful about doing a practice sermon delivery is it helps to assess the sermon length. And sometimes, especially if you've got a very specific time slot where your sermon has to be specifically no longer than 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 25 minutes or whatever it is, doing actual practice delivery helps you to assess the sermon length. I often find that when I'm actually delivering the sermon in reality, it often will actually take longer to deliver than it would appear to when it's just written down as points on a page. So it's a helpful way of assessing sermon length. It also helps to assess sermon communication. So when I'm having those practice deliveries of the sermon, it helps me to work out whether the points that I've made and the thoughts that I've had about communicating them actually work in reality. And sometimes I find the points that I've made, when I actually step out there in the practice delivery to try and communicate them, I realize actually I need to rethink that because it doesn't come across very well, or it doesn't communicate very well. And then another point is actually when I'm doing that sermon delivery, I do find actually that it generates new thoughts in my mind on the passage or the points that I'm making, or refines some of those existing ideas, illustrations and examples that I'm thinking of using during that sermon. So not only does it help me to remember the content, assess the sermon length, assess the sermon communication, but it often helps to refine my ideas, thoughts, illustrations, and examples. So that practice delivery process, I find, has several benefits, and wherever possible, I will try and make the time to do 2 or 3, perhaps, practice deliveries in front of an imaginary audience out loud, in order to reap the benefits, if you like, that I've just been talking to you about. So that's my thoughts on practicing your sermon before an imaginary audience out loud, and some of the benefits that I find of practicing in that way. So thank you again for listening to another edition of Preaching Pointers. If you've enjoyed this video, please like it and also subscribe to the channel. Thank you again for listening.